ever case of dyslexia, called at the time congenital word blindness, which was the name of it for many decades, was diagnosed in the late 18th century by a doctor who submitted the case report to the British Medical Journal. And that journal printed an extensive coverage of this young fellow in, late 19th century Great Britain, which was basically, cursive was it. You had cursive in first grade on, just as these folks want and say, well, cure all dyslexia and cure all reversals and prevent all dyslexia and prevent all reversals. Well, those photographs show very, very dyslexic cursive handwriting, letters reversed, parts of letters reversed, out of orders. This is case number one, first ever reported at a time when no one would dream of any writing that wasn't cursive. So, all these people who have gone around saying, make sure you teach cursive because it will cure all your dyslexics and it will prevent all your dyslexics. All I can say is I'm not going to speculate about whether there is an afterlife, whether there is a garden, whether there is a fire. I will not speculate. I am not someone who wants compulsion in religion. That we don't do that. Okay, I'm Jewish, but I know that the Muslims too officially say no compulsion in religion. And I very much agree with that. I will say that if their destiny is such that they die, they go to heaven, they go to the garden, whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if they're met at the gate by that young man, who lived in England, who lived in England, and he's going to hold up, his handwriting. He's going to say, welcome to paradise, but you do have a lot of explaining to do. I would not be surprised. And then again, people will say, oh, but even if it's not important, you have to have cursive for your signature. There is a sort of myth going around in many nations, and I'm not sure if it is common in the other English-speaking nations of the world, but it is very common in North America, a myth that people grow up with because they're taught it by their teachers who are taught it by their teachers. And the myth is that if you don't sign in cursive and if you don't, join every letter and use cursive letter shapes, your signature will not be legally valid unless it is penned in cursive. And perhaps you've heard this. Now, I was taught this by someone who must have known better, because my third grade teacher, and she was, and that year I was starting in a new school, and, I was already having difficulties. I had cursive in my second year in the previous school, and this school also had cursive, but a different copybook, even a harder one, I think. But she was telling all of us, well, boys and girls, you've got to write in cursive because, when you grow up, there are cursive cops and they walk around, cursive policemen. They're in plain clothes and they look at you and they know who's not writing in cursive. You'll grow up and at some point you'll be wanting to get married or rent an apartment or buy a house or have a job or one of these things. And someone's going to come up and they're going to tap you on the shoulder and they're going to say, you signed that thing in printing. You are not allowed to have a job, get married, have a house. Now, this is total baloney, as we say in the US, meaning it's, well, let's just say it's our substitute for a word I'm not going to say on the air, okay? Well, it's total balderdash, shall we say. But but even if we're not extreme as my third grade teacher was, we're often told this, and there is no legal basis for this. I married an attorney, and he checked it out. You can ask any attorney. In fact, one of the scarier things for me has been that I have met, either remotely or in cases or at times in person, attorneys who were testifying to legislatures or even legislators themselves who are testifying in favor of bills to require cursive. And even though they knew better, they would say this, and they'd say, Senator so-and-so, Representative so-and-so, I saw your speech, on YouTube when you were presenting in favor of this bill you introduced that, cursive should be required by all the students in your state, for all students in your state from the age 8 on. And you said because otherwise the signature cannot be legal. Well, don't you know this source? Don't you know that source? And some of them would say, yes, of course I know that. But I'm not going to say it because I think it's important that people should believe it. Well, an attorney, or for that matter, a school teacher has many, many things that they've got to say to those who listen to them. But as far as I know, one of those things should not be, misrepresenting the law of the land. It was actually your signature can be anything legally. And I have had this checked out that so in literally every country where they have writing, which is every country, your signature is whatever you produce when you intend to produce your signature. Mm-hmm. It can be, your name in print, cursive, Morse code, X, draw a flower, These days, the signature is not even writing at all. How often do we sign things electronically? Mm-hmm. And we cannot get out of this. If I buy something on eBay and if I agree to participate in the auction and to buy something if I win, and I, type my name as my signature, do you think if I win the auction, I decide I really don't want to buy, an inflatable life raft or something that I could say, oh, that's not my signature. I just typed it. It's not written. You will not get out of that. If you mean it to be your signature, it can be, it can be your thumbprint. It can be, your first name. It can be your initials. It can be, Japanese. It can be, anything. And so that argument is out of the water, and people will say, oh, but if it has the details and all the squigglies, it's much more unique and individual and identifiable. Well, that's not so. I have checked with questioned document examiners, these specialists who are responsible for detecting forgery and identifying the writers of anonymous, unsigned letters. And they tell me the simpler a handwriting is, the easier it is to identify. When people wish to become forgers and find someone to steal from by faking a document, they look around for the people with the most elaborate and the most squiggly wiggly signatures, and those are the ones that they will pick on. They will not pick on someone with a simple signature. They will not. And just, I'm going to show you, my signature. I'm going to write my signature on checks is very slightly different in one detail. I'm not putting in the air my signature on checks, except it's substantially the same other than some small details being different, as I don't want to put on my signature on my check. Now, my pen actually leaked right at the end of Gladstone. So it actually linked. So I'm going to write this. I'm going to write this again and hope my pen does not leak this time.
Maybe it's not the right time.
Yep, definitely. Yes, I do still write with a fountain pen because I love it. It gives me something to play with, satisfying that autistic impulse to fidget, because I can fill it up with it and change it and wash it out. And that's one reason I became a calligrapher. It's something socially acceptable that I can fidget with and that people will actually like, instead of, and I do find it more satisfying than a lot of the things. I will say pens have been a big part of my life. I have to tell you, besides the handwriting books and so on. And by the way, if my book on reading cursive fast, if that sells out its first printing, my intent is to then write a book or a series of books on handwriting. But I did agree with my publisher that this has to sell out first. So I hope you're going to buy it. Now, I could tell you, to buy it where you might normally buy books, but I did promise my publisher that I would recommend that you buy it from her website. Go to nationalautismresources.com, put in the name of the book, and you will be able to buy it. Okay.
If you share me the link, then I will.
I will tell you. I will definitely. I may as well write out. I may as well write out the link, and just to show you that I don't always write with just a calligraphy pen, I may as well just write with some ordinary pen, because that will give you. Okay, and this will show you it doesn't have to be a special pen. I like it because after all these years of being, I better write a little smaller if it's to fit on all the page. After all these years of basically being told I was basically garbage because I couldn't write nicely, Why shouldn't I want to write? Anyway, I will do this and you will be able to photograph this, nationalautismresources.com, and you will be able to see how well I can do even with a ballpoint. And ballpoints are, of course, quite difficult to control. I do not recommend them, but I can deal with them. If you've ever wondered why a ballpoint, a biro is so hard to control, the stuff inside a ballpoint is actually chemically almost identical to the transmission fluid in your motor car. It simply has a few more dyes, so it will show up on the paper, but otherwise it's almost the same thing. And you know how slippery that stuff has got to be. It's got to be slippery, of course, to come out of the pen, but it's hard to control. You're writing with something that's meant to be slippy and sliding. Now, speaking of pens, even though this is a ballpoint and it looks quite ordinary, these are pens that I have made for me by a factory in China. And I like to call this the Super Stylus Script Tip-tastic pen, because built into it, I have my 7 best tips on quickly improving your handwriting. Now, those pens too, you can buy them direct from me, but because nationalautismresources.com knows that they can order them from me, you can definitely do them. I will actually, however, write out the website where you can order them. Well, I would say, I used to give out, I have a website where I sell them from. It's yet another website. But because I really don't, I would rather sell them through one of my distributors, and I have a distributor who handles the pen and handles another product I make, which I don't have in my house as it's rather bulky, which is actually a series of lined papers. I'm going to write down therapro.com because they're a distributor that sells this pen, sells another product. I'll sell it in a moment. And they also sell basically a series of lined papers that I designed. Now, all you have to do is actually go to therapro.com and put in my name. Okay, put in my name. But I'm going to give you first the name of my, series of papers. And actually, if you search this on the net with my name, you'll find it, or Therapro has it. They are at present a very good distributor. Now, since the name of the pen is very long, writing it down is a bit of a pain. And yes, I actually partly named it after that word in Mary Poppins, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Well, I decided that my pen would therefore be the Super Stylus Script Tip-tastic. It's made for me by a company in China. The paper, which I don't have with me, is actually made for me by, that's printed by Therapro, and they print it so that I don't have to. Super Stylus Script Tip-tastic pen. But the best way is if you go to Therapro and you look at all their handwriting tools and their pens, because this name is very, very long. Super Stylus Script Tip-tastic pen. Let's get really
The name is
close.
also very stylish, very catchy name.
Yeah, well, yes, although it's a pain to type on my computer, I do it with a text expansion. So I just type SSSTTP and it comes right out. But Super Stylus Script Tip-tastic. But if you go there, or better, you go to therapro.com, and if you can't find the paper or the pen, you tell them, you say, I want the paper and the pen that Kate Gladstone made, and they will know what this is. Better than that, something else that's made for me by yet another factory in China, which, by the way, means that you could get these in India. If I get orders from India, you could ship them. I have this little thing, looks like nothing. It's what I call the try-on. It's a triangular shaped thing that goes on a pen. It is not only a pen positioner to help you with your grip, but it's the only reversible one in the world. And of course, you can have a soft flower-like shape or a firmer triangular shape. I have it made in different colors, and we can even get mixes of colors. In other words, let's say a business in Pakistan ordered, and let's say they wanted one of them to be a mix of the colors of the Pakistani flag. We could do this. Sometimes I have a lot of my pens in my house. I will put these on to get a very customized grip. We also do make a couple of smaller sizes. This one will go onto rather thick pens or even thin crayons or thick pencils. There's one that goes on to more ordinary pens and pencils. I'm going to put that on for a little demonstration. We even have a very thin size, which is not reversible. And the nice thing about these is, of course, you can have lovely colors. You can identify, who's got what pen. So there's no argument. Oh, teacher, Marie stole my pen. No, no, no. People go, they argue, and Lee stole my pen, make him give it back. But people have actually found other uses for these. A lot of my customers buy these and they buy a few extra because they will take a matched pair and put them on the frames of their eyeglasses. When you get up in the morning and you wear eyeglasses, how do you find your eyeglasses without your eyeglasses? You haven't even yet had your coffee. Your eyes are barely open and your eyes may not work too well when they are open. We have had people put them onto keychains to identify the keys, put them so the top of the key goes through. We have had people put them, especially the smaller sizes, on not only pens and pencils, but the charging wires for their cell phones, so you can identify by color which device is which. Or if you have several people in the same business, the same family, the same schoolroom have got the same thing, you can assign everyone a color or a combination. So, like, in other words, if Ali gets blue and purple, and if Kadisha gets, blue and green, you can know right away, no more arguments. And of course, the gimmick I used to make people not embarrassed to use these, because, people don't want anything that says you're special, you're disabled, you're different. Give these to everyone. Say, I'm giving these out, because they'll stop your pens from rolling onto the floor. And, we all
It
hate
is
when
difficult for children to write, especially who have clumsy grip, and it is.
yes, and this will shape your grip for you, and you can customize it. Some of us need a firmer grip, some of us need a less firm grip, and of course, some of us might wish to write or need to write with a small pen, but still need a rather thick grip. Well, look what you can do. You can put a little one and a bigger one. So
It's a magic.
let us yes, I would say it might be magic. And by the way, if one is worried about safety, when I worked with the factory, I picked one that made these out of surgical grade silicone. In other words, if you get plastic earrings, that's the kind that fit in, and people have pierced ears, they put these little decorative things. That's the same plastic that they would put into anything in your body. If you have a surgical implant for any reason that's made out of silicone, it will be this, which means, well, it's not meant to be eaten, but it means that if you're a child and you're fidgeting and you bite it or something, it's not going to kill you. It's going to go through
It's a
you.
safe thing. We
I
can
mean, it's
environment
not
safe.
meant to be eaten, but in other words, and we know that many people on the autism spectrum and many other people, they like things that they can play with, chew, and so on. I did, in fact, hear from a couple of people, one young autistic lady and one father of an autistic young fellow, who told me about putting these onto a silicone rubber cord as a sort of necklace or wristband so that they could be played with, so they could be discreetly chewed. Now, I will tell you that the people who sell them do not recommend chewing them. There's a danger of swallowing. It could go right through them, but they cannot recommend that it should be chewed. So I am not recommending this. I will tell you what people have done. I will say that if anyone is so imprudent as to chew it and it opens up, bites off, if they bite it, they will not be harmed. By the way, much the same with the pen. I picked a pen that, why did I call it the super stylus script tip-tastic? Well, besides the little pull out scroll, which will give you instructions for improving your handwriting.
Mhm.
It has a tip that is a stylus tip. You can write with it on your computer screen and then just get out the actual writing tip to be on your paper. You don't have to switch. You know how we go, and we go normally go pen, pen, computer, and you're switching back and forth.
Yeah.
Here you don't have to. It actually has a grip of its own, which is quite decent. It actually can be refilled with any standard refill. It does come with a very high quality, but if you go to the office supply stores, you will be able to buy, any standard refill will fit right in there. You'll have noticed the logo is on the pen. Now, this one is a little cracked. This one I saved out to be one I wrote with, because if they get cracked in shipment, those are the ones I save out to write within my house, because they cannot be sold. And, one or two in perhaps a load of 1,000 will be cracked. Now, when this occurs, you see that we have the logo on it. Now, one thing I do not have to show you is that on some of the pens, for some of the pens, I actually printed up extra labels.
Mhm.
Same logo, handwriting that works.com, which is another of my websites.
Mhm.
And that one is specifically devoted to remediation, so you can see it handwriting. Now, I actually have the same label that comes on the inside of the pen printed up, so I could put it on a certain percentage of the pens, and normally about 15% upside down. Now, why do I do this? Because we now know in our day and age what was not known at some point in the past, and some people are still only getting the word that there's a certain number of people in the world who are left-handed. They're going to be left-handed. They, if you want them to write well and to do things well, you have to let them use the hand that they came into the world designed to use. They have to adapt in some ways to a right-handed world for handshakes and certain other things. But as far as they can, they came into the world left-handed. Now, if you are naturally left-handed and you write, have you noticed that every logo on every pen that you've ever seen is naturally enough positioned so that a right-handed person will see it properly?
Mhm.
If you put the pen in the left hand for writing, and here, if you put in the left hand for writing, the logo will be upside down if you're a left-handed person. So I actually have labels I print and put on the pens upside down for a certain percentage, 15%, unless I'm told to make otherwise for a specific batch, because that is typically the number of left-handers that you will get genetically.
Mhm.
Almost 1 out of 6, if they're not interfered with in some way.
Mhm.
Because I want them to be able to at least see something correct side up for them.
Mhm.
This is a disability issue also, because there is a high correlation between unusual handedness, left-handedness, or ambidexterity, or uncertain dominance, and literally all of the neurological issues that I've mentioned tonight. Even though I'm right-handed, I'm good enough with my left hand now that I can work with a left-handed person. I can demonstrate at least somewhat with their hand. I might have an unusual, pen position, but I can demonstrate at least well enough that I can show them what they're supposed to be doing. You probably can't see it here, but I'm going to go and I'm going to write H-E. And this is not going to look good. It's not my dominant hand, but at least I know what they're going through, okay?
Yeah.
Done with my left hand. Hello.
But
Not
it is
great, but not
readable.
terrible
You can
either.
read that, whatever you wrote it over here.
Can you read it now?
Yeah, I
Good.
can read it.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Perfect. There we go. In other words, so I know what they're going through. By the way, about half of the people in my family on both sides, including including a couple of my siblings, a sister who is still alive and another sister who passed on from cancer a few years ago, are left-handed, or I should say in the case of the deceased ones, were. Much the same as it happens in my husband's family, and we do have a very high incidence going back, a few generations at least, of all of these conditions that we've discussed. In fact, I will tell you, a rather funny story about my brother. Okay, my brother and I, happen to be the right-handed ones, but we were the ones and are the ones with, I think, more of these symptoms of various neurodiversities than the lefties in the family, who were my sister who is deceased and my sister who is now living, plus a lot of the nephews, nieces, children, and so on, in the younger generations, and going back as far as we can trace the older ones too, even though, well, one of my grandmothers was born in 1900 and it was certainly discouraged. Well, what's interesting is that even within my own family, there was not always a lot of understanding. We knew definitely about lefties, and it's important to know about this. If you understand about left-handers as an analogy, you will begin to understand about neurodiversity, because left-handedness was the first type of neurodiversity that was recognized and considered to be something we had to accommodate for after many, many thousands of years of civilization, when it was just, for one reason or another, was not something people knew how to deal with. In fact, I will tell you a story. If you look at educational journals and newspapers in the USA, even from 100 or 120 years ago, you find that there are articles about left-handedness that make it sound like a disability. You find school has a crusade to cure all their left-handers, and they are so proud that they cured so many of them, and it's scary. And people write articles like, don't let your children grow up to be left-handed, they will be against society and they will be no good. And then later on we start to see, oh my God, we looked at these people and they are not defective, and they are not mentally disabled, and they are not stubborn and contrary, and they can be among the brightest people. I actually believe that we would not have been able to have the neurodiversity awareness now in 2020, 21, 22, 23, if we had not had about 100 years before, left-handed awareness. It was not called that, but it's almost creepy, just as there are neurodiverse organizations now, groups of dyslexics, autistics, whatever, who have groups and get together to fight for a place in society and understanding. Believe it or not, in the USA, there actually was a club of left-handed people, 120 years ago, literally were fighting to get punished in school and not have their children get beaten up in school on their left hands. And I know that this thing is perhaps more a matter of living memory in some other countries like Pakistan, maybe, and India than here, but I'm telling you this so that you will know that neurodiversity is something that has many, many, many forms. By the way, I don't want to get into this too much. It's not what we are talking about, but one thing I have specialized in when it comes to writing is helping people who have some hand issue, whether they are left-handed and they were not given instruction that could demonstrate for them, or in some cases, people who have, have had hand injuries, arm injuries, dominant hand. For instance, a right-hander, but now must write left-handed because of, a war injury or something of the sort, or an industrial injury. It happens, And what I'm trying to say is that, there is hope, for those of us who are, not, who are not terribly familiar with the issues. We tend to give up, and we tend to think, oh my God, I'm having difficulty. My son is having difficulty. My daughter is having difficulty. There's no hope.
They're just holding
But what
pen
I
like
am
this. If you look toward them, I don't even have pen right now. I think I have pen.
yeah,
Let me show you.
let's see are you asking about that well-known hand position, that
Yeah,
the
something like that.
inverted.
I'm wearing a very big
Now
ring.
this is very interesting. We
Something
used to
like that.
think
Then there
for
is a
many,
formal
many
grip,
years,
something like that,
and yet, yeah. Now we used to, Now we used to think for many, many years that position was, you know, was adopted by all left-handed people in the diversity picture. A researcher who is now retired, but for many years was the States, a wonderful woman with whom I got to speak just once in my life called Dr. Jure Levy. And she is now quite old and retired, but I will spell her name as it is, as her first name is somewhat unusual, and her last name also is unusual, I think, in Pakistan. Well, she researched the issue of hand position and cerebral dominance, trying to find out why is there this hand position? How does this happen? Well, she had a boyfriend, and one day she noticed her boyfriend was writing something, and she said, "Oh, I never realized you're left-handed." And he said, "Oh, honey, you're crazy. I'm not. I have my pen in my right hand. Look, yeah, but you're holding it like a left-handed. I thought you were well, but I'm not." Well, she looked into it, and first she had to examine the usual hypothesis. Oh, it's because of the difficulty of going, left to right with your left hand. And one thing she said, well, if that was so, then the people who write Arabic or Urdu or Hebrew, he's Jewish and I'm Jewish, so she certainly knew about Hebrew, and that all goes right to left. Well, if they're right-handed, wouldn't they all be doing the inverted with the right hand? And they're not. The same percentage is doing it as in, let's say, the USA or the UK. And what is that percentage? You have about half of left-handers doing it, only half.
Yeah.
And you have a very small percentage of right-handers doing it, a very, very small percentage. And, reports, vary, roughly 6% of right-handed people.
Yeah.
And she actually started measuring their brain function with EEGs, MRIs. And here's what she found. The persons who invert their hand in this way, and she calls it inverted handedness, and she has some other terms for it that I'm not going to bother, rather technical. The persons who hold their hands like this way, whichever hand they're writing with, their language hemisphere, the language center of their brain, proves to be on the same side as their writing hand instead of on the opposite side, as is true for most of us. So that's one thing she found that was amazing. And you cannot change that. That is inborn, much like handedness itself. I mean, if you could change it, what would you need to do? Brain surgery? What is also interesting is that she also found that, if you have this hand position, it will actually indicate whether you're better in verbal or in math and spatial skills, but it's not a simple relationship. What she found is this, and she found that there are actually 8 different categories of this neurodiversity indicated by right versus left hand and men versus women and inverted versus non-inverted. So 3 variables, 8 categories, and these can actually be diagrammed. And the best way is to go through. If you take a right-handed man and you see that he's holding the pen in the conventional way, you can bet, and if he's right-handed with a conventional pen hold, and this is natural for him, you can bet that this person will be better in spatial and math than in verbal. If he's right-handed, male, but holding the pen this way, he will be the opposite. He will be the sort of man who's better in verbal than in spatial. If you look at male attorneys, for instance, if they're right-handed, if they're thoroughly right-handed, they will more often have this, or possibly something intermediate. If you're intermediate, you might be more balanced. You might be somewhat equally verbal. If you look on the other hand at a right-handed woman holding the pen conventionally, right-handed woman or girl, you have very high odds that this will be better, a more talented verbal than spatial individual. Go to a right-handed woman, though, and if the pen is somewhat inverted, and this is actually the case for me, you're going to see better in spatial and verbal. And this will be whether or not there's any diagnosed disability. This will just be part of the package. Those are 4 categories. Now switch over to the left-handed people, and it reverses. Left-handed male, if with a conventional pen hold, will be better verbally than spatial or math. Left-handed man with an inverted pen hold better in math and spatial and verbal. Left-handed woman, conventional pen hold, will be better at spatial and math and verbal. Left-handed woman, inverted pen hold, better at, will be, again, the opposite, will be the remaining category of better again at verbal. Now, I have actually run little bets at parties, I have sometimes, made little bets on people that I can go up to a person, watch you write for a little bit. And since I know whether you're a man or woman, look at you, and I know what hand you're writing with, I know whether your hand is like this or like this or like this, I can literally tell with a very high degree of accuracy whether on your school grades, your school examinations, and the like, you tended to get better grades in your verbal subjects than your math and spatial type of things like geometry or, science or, crafts or carpentry, or when you're math and spatial, or whether you were about equal. And I have very, very seldom been incorrect. One time when I was incorrect, it was someone who, had a very severe hand injury growing up, which probably had something to do, he couldn't have a certain flexibility. Which means that this is why I am, I think, the only handwriting teacher in all the world who, when I teach hand position, I teach 4 of them. Mm-hmm. 100, 200 years ago, when you taught hand position, you taught 1. Right-handed, hold the pen. This is how to do it. No exceptions. Now, for the past roughly 100 years in the USA and other amounts of times in other countries, we have accepted that, okay, there is a right-hander and a left-hander, but we're still saying, got to be the conventional hold. I'm saying you can have an unconventional hold without hurting yourself, and you might have
sometimes it hurts.
We have all
don't write. I have this idea. They don't write because their hand is hurting, and sometimes they're using a wrong way to write.
Yeah, they are using this, but you can have an inverted pen hold and modify it so it doesn't hurt. If you do it and it's not well done, it's going to hurt you. Have to have a paper,
like this,
Yeah, but you know why they do it like this? Because nobody showed them what I showed them in that picture. You saw there was not only a pen, but a piece of paper for each of our 4 illustrations. Because your handhold, if you go to the handhold that you're inclined to do and your paper position is not accordingly, it will not work. Now I have a bit of paper, which I'm going to hold up this little letterhead, and it's a little crumpled because I was using it, it came out a little crooked out of the machine and a little corner tore. So I reserved it for here because I was going to use it. Let's say that if you are a right-handed person, most people know how a right-handed person conventionally holding the pen should position it. Mm-hmm. We know, they have to have the pen, they should tip it. And people are beginning to know, okay, left-handed person, if they're holding the pen conventionally, they tip it to be aligned with the left forearm on the left side of the body. Mm-hmm. But people haven't worked out, what do you have to do if you are an inverted pen hold? Mm-hmm. And let's say we think of the inverted pen hold left-handers because they are better known. Believe it or not, there is the same number in terms of absolute numbers of righty inverters and lefty inverters in the world. Mm-hmm. But of course, we think of it being with the left-handers because since there are fewer left-handers, that absolute number is a much higher percentage of the left-handers. If you're left-handed, I'm going to actually pull out my little graphic here. And by the way, I do actually offer, an actual PowerPoint version of this. Mm-hmm. Let's say we have this graphic. We have a picture of a left-hander, and we have, if he's left-handed and holding the pen not inverted, mm-hmm. he should have or she should have the long axis of the paper mm-hmm. aligned with the forearm of the writing arm. And we know this. We mostly know what the conventionally oriented right and left-hander should do. Mm-hmm. But do we know what, but most of us don't know, what if they are driven by something that's in their brains, mm-hmm. in terms of, what they are better at, which is this complex relationship among male or female, verbal or verbal, and math or spatial, and handedness. If you want to have a if you want to have or need to have an inverted handedness, you can make it work by positioning the paper on the same side of the body as your writing hand, yes, but tip it as if you were writing with the opposite hand. In other words, if you are a left-handed inverter and you run into these, you're not going to be able to change them, especially not after they've been writing for a little while in some way. What you want to do for your left-handed inverters, and I've tested this out, you'll see, every one of my students who had a handedness issue, what you have had to do if it was interfering with them. If you're a left-hander, your paper needs to be on the left side of your body. If you are a not inverted handwriter, if you're the kind that we think is normal, hold the pen as we think normally, have that pen positioned in line with your writing on forearm. But if you are not, if you're an inverter, you must compensate. You have to turn the paper sideways. In other words, if you have only half the adaptation that you need to be in this neurodiverse, this special category, where, and each of us has our own diverse strengths and weaknesses, and this is one way in which it comes out. You're going to have a problem. Everyone's going to think, oh yeah, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good, because you're only doing half of the adaptation that you need. You're holding the pen in the way you need, but you're not holding the paper in the way that goes with that. It's like trying to drive a car when you are trying simultaneously to press the brake and to press the gas pedal. It won't work. And this is why, the inverters get a bad rap. And so say, oh, it's going to hurt their hand. Well, it won't, because, we all do an inverted position. Sometimes, every time you eat with a fork or a spoon, that hand is doing the inverted position. So it's not something that's going to
people are
hurt
eating
you
like this, I have
every time
they're eating like this, otherwise you have to
but
do it
that
like
can
this.
be worked with, and it should be worked with. Yeah. And my little take is, whatever hand position or whatever paper position you need, my little take on that is, take your hand and extend those first two fingers, whether they're on the pen or a fork or a spoon. Tell yourself you are shaking hands with the tool. So you extend those fingers, and that in itself will obviate so many of the difficulties. And similarly, if for any reason you wish to practice by writing in the air, many people do. Many people practice writing there, and they do it in a way that really does not reflect how one must hold a hand and pen to write. If you just trace with one finger, it's not really the same action. If you want to get the action that you'll get for a pen, and you're doing some kind of air writing exercise, put out both fingers and maybe even your
When you're
thumb.
reading, when you can do that. Like I used to practice that in my speech therapy session. When they are doing puzzle, then I take their hand and do it like that. And I remember one of my there was a girl, and she started doing that on newspaper. Then she started writing, and she was not even going to school. So that's how I came to know that she's a very smart girl, and she got IQ of above average person. So that is helping our people, and people are not familiar with those things.
That is a very that's a very significant thing, because one of the things that we can learn from, one of the sources we can best learn from, how to help people, see what people are coming up with themselves as adaptations. For instance, let me tell you, we, even in the USA and other countries where handwriting is basically either join everything or join nothing, and those are the only things, when we look at what people do with or without disabilities, when we look at the writing of those who have become fast and legible handwriters, despite it all, whatever they were taught, they become fast and legible. What do we see? We don't see they join everything. We don't see they join nothing. We see a semi-joined. We see very print-like printed shapes for those letters that disagree between printed and cursive. But we see some joins used and others not, as we've discussed, no matter what they've been taught. Yeah. In other words, we see that the good writers are trying to reinvent what they perhaps should have been taught originally. I would say not perhaps, but really, but in the name of politeness, not everyone will agree that this should be taught, but I would say if the most efficient, legible handwriters come to do this, well, we should be teaching this from the beginning, just as, we know when we watch a soccer match or a cricket match,
like
that there's always
a player very young
a better technique, and then the others learn from that player, and over time the standard technique in the game changes a bit, doesn't it? And when I see, as I fairly often see, writers with a diagnosis of dyslexia, dysgraphia, who have somehow worked it out on their own how to write legibly by adulthood, they are typically writing a very simple print-like semi-joined hand. In other words, a reinvention of in our own times of the Renaissance italic. And you might think, many people say, Kate, you're fooling yourself. That's just because they're taught a totally not joined handwriting and totally joined, and they mix them up together. And I say, I would like to think that. It sounds like that would be plausible, but we know it's not plausible. How? Because this was actually documented in research as far back as 1900 in the USA, 1899 and 1900 in studies at Yale and Harvard. And let me tell you about a very classic study. There was a psychologist at Harvard, and his name does not matter, but his name was Cloyd McAllister. And he is long dead, but he was one of the preeminent educational psychologists of his generation, which admittedly was, over 120 years ago. Well, he wanted to do some research on the movements that are used in handwriting, even at that time, to find out what were the most efficient possible movements. And he made some discoveries, and they were actually, people read them and they said, this was good, but we cannot adopt these. It's too different from what we know about, because he was making the same findings, but people, this Cloyd McAllister fellow found, the highest efficiency and legibility in very semi-joined, very slightly slanted, quite print-like writing, even though nobody was learning any of this. This was 1900, this was definitely the age when cursive was it. Cursive was, the 10 commandments and the 5 pillars of Islam all rolled into one practically. Now, as Dr. McAllister studied this, he had an idea. Towards the end of his research, he said to himself, I should write to the experts in penmanship who have schools and courses to teach handwriting and who write the copybooks of cursive and all this, and I should see what they're doing. And I should ask them what they think about what I found. Should it be permissible to lift the pen? He said, well, I'm pretty sure they'll say no, but I want to get it in writing. So he started a handwritten correspondence with the top people in the country. Because at the time you could go to college and, you could major in penmanship, and you could be, if it was a business college, there were colleges that today are business colleges. Many of them actually began as penmanship colleges, with a course in accounting and so on thrown in. And so he wrote to the founders of these schools and the writers of the copybooks that were used. And he would write to them and, ask them, dear Dr. So-and-so, do you believe in handwriting? It should be permissible at any time to lift the pen within a word. And he had some other questions, but that was the main one. And of course, they would all write back and say, no, 1,000 times no. And you should read my textbook where I've got printed in big red letters on the front page in a big black box. Never, never, ever do this. Never lift the pen within a word. You will lose your speed. You will lose your continuity of writing. No good writer does this. No good teacher would allow to do it. So well and good. So Dr. McAllister sat down with, all these letters. I imagine probably a great big pile of beautifully handwritten cursive letters, I would imagine. And he went through them, and he did a very clever thing. In each and every word of each and every sample, by these, master writers, master handwriters, who had written these, copybooks and had written about their copybooks, and never pick up the pen. And he counted every time within a word that the pen had been visibly lifted. And he found pen lifts all over the place, little ones perhaps, but they were there. For instance, in one letter by a particularly fervent correspondent, a very eminent teacher, was a 63-word sentence right in the middle of the letter, which said, which basically said, no, we cannot lift up the pen. It would be destructive of handwriting continuity and speed. I would never do this, nor would I permit anyone going on, for 63 words. He counted every break and he found, if you wanted to guess how many words he found a pen lift within, well, he found a pen lift in 28 words in a 63-letter sentence. In other words, in nearly half the words in the very sentence where this fellow is saying, I would never do it. I would never allow my students to do it. This would just be wrong. Now, I think every culture and every civilization has known the point of the, has a proverb, has a saying that teaches us the message, practice what you preach. Everyone knows this.
Yeah.
We know this before we can even speak. We know that an honest person, an honest teacher, won't tell you to do something that the teacher is not capable of doing or that the teacher does not want to do. I would say that in cases like this, perhaps it's the time that one should preach what one practices. Now, I will tell you, I have actually gone through, the research from this 1900 study and from several other studies as part of a work in progress where I'm literally compiling and comparing various handwriting studies on the comparative efficiencies of models. This is not, formal research, but I'm simply creating a series of PowerPoints that will look at what the research has been on various areas such as joining, speed, letter shape, and so on. And of course, I list this study and I illustrated in, my, section on joining, in my PowerPoint on joining. And I will tell you, because even though this was 1900 and Dr. McAllister was not able, technically it was not easy to put a photograph of the writing. She didn't put it, but he tabulated exactly by typing the sentence that the person wrote and using marks, dots, to indicate where the pen had been lifted. So it was possible for me to look at, well, just what letters had the pen been lifted before. And I found out very easily that, almost always where the pen had been lifted, it was either after a descender letter, such as Y or J, to avoid a loop that would otherwise have been made, or going into an ascender letter, also plainly in order to avoid a loop, or actually most of the instances, about 4 out of 5, where to avoid the curve, the difficult curve that is made when we go up from the baseline of the writing into a letter with the rounded shapes such as lowercase a, c, d, g, and q. Now, what's interesting to me is that this is in the writing of, a 100% cursive. This was a man who, crusaded for cursive. He built his career on joining every letter, although he wasn't doing it himself. He plainly didn't know this. And where is he taking his pen lifts? In the same place that in italic one is allowed or encouraged to do pen lifts. But, pen masters in the 1900s, they had not learned, italic. That was something that was from the Renaissance. That was a style they knew of, but it was not something they thought of could be modern. They, by and large, did not learn to write such a semi-joined style. By and large, they knew it existed just as evil scripts existed. And I know that the Brahmi script existed in India, and Hebrew script or the Roman script existed. Doesn't mean I would write them for today, but I could write them. I just don't. In other words, we have someone who not only teaches something quite different, probably was never exposed to any semi-joined form of writing, but is ideologically and educationally opposed to it. And, he's lifting the pen very, very, very often. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you this, as I said before, one of the things that dyslexics are good at is being disruptors. And one of the things neurodivergent individuals are good at is being disruptors. And I have to tell you that I will sound like a very mean person, but that's not my intent. My intent is to wake people up. And one of the joys in my life has been waking people up by going to them and saying, your model that you believe in, that you believe you do, and that you believe everyone should do, you're not really doing it. For instance, if I go to someone who writes in a very slanted model and thinks this is good, I will say, this is what you're teaching, but you're often deviating from it in the direction of less slant. A person who teaches and requires a strictly vertical model, mm-hmm. I will challenge such a person, madam or sir, would you write out your name and your postal address in just the same way that you teach your students to do it and that you want them to do it? And they do it and they deviate from their example. And I point this out, not to blame, but to praise. In other words, sir, madam, you are doing better than your example. You're not practicing what you preach. In some respects, not all, but some respects, your writing is better. You're practicing better than what you preach. And when you have students who see this, who see that what you say is not what you do.
Exactly. This is what I was thinking. This is what I was thinking,
yes.
When you were talking about that.
Yes.
Do whatever you believe. If you don't believe, people are not going to trust you. And people don't get this idea why people don't trust us.
Do what you think you're doing.
Yeah.
And if you're not conscious, we all do things a little different from what we might teach others. The fact that I write a rather elaborate lowercase g, and I'll write the word eggs, and I like to write that Renaissance G. That doesn't mean that I will teach it to a 5-year-old. And most, I'll teach them the standard G, and then I'll offer this as a choice. If you like this, you can do it. This is also correct. Yeah. Not many people like it, but it's this. But the point is, I'm conscious of what I'm doing. I am not doing one thing and unaware of it. And now I would say that one of the issues, and I'd say it's an issue, but it's also a special gift that those who are neurodivergent can bring to the world, is that because we don't see the things that are obvious to other people. Yeah. And sometimes the things we know are the things that just aren't so. That's, there's a saying that is credited to the American author Mark Twain that, that there are things we know and there are things we know that just ain't so. And this is a very true saying. When someone can say, but sir, madam, you're telling me to do something and you're telling me to see this and it's not there, we have an obligation to listen. Yeah. And if we are people who see it, we have a right, and I would say probably an obligation to speak up. Now, you are perhaps familiar, I know in many countries, I don't know about Pakistan, but I know that many countries are familiar with the 19th century story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Have you ever heard of that story?
Repeat again, sorry.
Now, there's a story called The Emperor's New Clothes. Have you ever heard that story?
The empress who was not having dress.
New clothes.
There was a small girl who talk about that.
Yeah, well, be brief, for those who don't know it, it's a story by the 19th century Danish writer Hans Christian Andersen. And the story is this, that once there was an emperor who needed or who wanted a new set of royal robes. His old ones were wearing out. And he advertised, for tailors to come, and he would pick the best one, the one who could work with the finest fabric. Well, two dishonest persons saw their chance. They did not know how to be tailors at all, but they set up as tailors, and they did not have any thread, any cloth, anything. They said, we are the best tailors in the world. We sew and weave with the thread so fine that the only people who can see it are the people who are the most fitted for their position. Anyone who is not fitted for this position, his eyes are not pure and he cannot see or thread. Mm-hmm. So he had looms and everything, sewing machines, everything, and pretending to go through the motions, but no thread. And he sat there, and the emperor was impressed, and the emperor said, yes, this is someone I must have, because I could wear my royal robes made of this, and anyone who sees it, if they say they cannot see it, I will know immediately that this person is not fit for his position. Mm-hmm. So of course the great day came, the emperor's birthday, and he was going to have a grand entry, a parade, wearing his new robe.